stupid. They think we're beyond stupid. I mean, from their point of view, we must look comatose. We were just lollygagging around thinking the quality of our life we got from our parents was going to continue to even get better for our kids. But somewhere along the line, we confused quality with quantity. And now we realize there's only so much to go around. I think we're at the point now where we all recognize that things aren't going to be as good for those in the future as it was for us. Remember that news guy who wrote the book about the greatest generation? Remember? Well, somebody's probably going to name our generation as the worst. I mean, for the mess we're leaving our kids. And this is the first time that things are not going to be better off in the future. Maybe with the exception of those poor kids who lived just before the Depression. And I tell these kids nowadays, it wasn't intentional. Things got away from us. We lost control of our lives. It's like that story about how to cook a frog. You know, the one where if you throw a frog in boiling water, it just jumps out. But if you put it in cool water and you gradually turn up the heat, you'll have cooked frog. It doesn't know what's happening until it's too late. That's what happened to us. We've become a bunch of contented frogs, thinking that the pot of water had all the comforts of a pond with our best interests at heart. So we let those we elected regulate the heat without sticking our heads out of the pot to make sure they weren't cooking us. I mean, we put them in charge. So why would they want to do us in? Anyway, that's what happened. We got too comfortable, and now if they see us moving around or complaining, they just turn up the heat. But that's how things snuck up on us, because we weren't paying attention. And just a few years ago, it seemed everything was going pretty good for everybody. Anyway, that's what we were told. And you really don't question what you're told unless you can figure out what's really going on. And then you may not want to know. But pretty soon we were going to find out that while we were told everybody was equally doing good, some were equally doing a lot better than others. And it wasn't us. You know, it's always about somebody else until it's about us or someone we know. And we have such a hard time realizing what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes until we get there. And until then, we can imagine and even criticize what it's like. And whichever side we're on, we do a lot of that. You remember, you know that. I remember when I was a kid, my parents used to use the saying, "That's how the other half lives," when describing those who are well off. And I guess we'd have to say that's how those other 1%ers live. I wonder what happened to that other 49%. My father used to advise me to, and of course we've heard this a lot, be nice to the people on the way up, because you're going to meet them on the way down. And now the lines have become a lot longer on the way down. And why is that? Is it just bad decisions and bad luck? Well, I got to put myself in someone else's shoes when my buddy Peter got laid off and switched lines. He went from Lehman Brothers, pond, at 150 grand a year, to an insurance company, pot, for 30,000. He found out pretty quick what it's like to be one of the guys getting cooked. And you know, when I think about his story, I get to thinking it's about all of us. About how the details are different, but the reason and the effects are the same. One of these deals that doesn't have anything to do with us until it does. Then we see the reasons for the downward spiral of us all. So anyway, Peter tells me about how he and his buddy John, a guy making 300 grand at Goldman Sachs, he had 300,000, leave a Kiwanis meeting at the same time, and they're both in a hurry. John, because he has tickets to the Knicks game and has to meet his friends in the city. And Peter needs to get home because his wife's going to be late for class if he doesn't get there in time. So both of them pass through an intersection that has one of those red light monitoring cameras. Now, I don't know if we can blame the downfall of modern civilization on the advent of these cameras, but there are lessons to be learned. Bear with me. Okay, so a month passes and Peter calls me up and wants to borrow 100 because he just gets a ticket in the mail for $150 from the red light camera they say he went through. And for whatever reason, he doesn't want to ask John. He tells me it's going to take almost a third of his paycheck. And he doesn't want his wife getting upset because they're barely making it now with the money they have coming in. Oh yeah, and she's going to school because she also got laid off and is trying to become a nurse while he babysits their kid. Then he tells me about his buddy John, who also got a ticket through the same intersection, was joking with him about how that happens to him all the time. Of course, the $150 is nothing to him, and the ticket doesn't go on his record. Anyway, all this got me thinking that a kind of unintentional act of government could really put the screws to some folks. And you know how we always think that laws should be applied equally to everyone? But we forget sometimes that this country is made up of very different people. So I'm thinking that someone making, let's say $15,000 a year could lose more than half their weekly pay that they're now using for rent and groceries, getting one of these tickets, versus the guy who makes, let's say, 100, 200, or even 300 grand like John, and not think twice about it. Of course, the argument could be made that the poor guy will learn not to go through red lights. But then the government's modifying behavior based on a person's income. So I'm starting to think of all this other economy stuff, and we're always talking about it, and that life isn't fair. And that you can't expect government to have different punishments for people depending upon what they make, even though that's kind of how our tax system works. And of course, that depends whether you're one of the frogs living in a pot or you're living in a pond. Like, we're all supposed to pay taxes, but some people don't have to pay any. And some people have to pay more. And some of the people who don't pay any make a lot more than those who end up paying more. Like, remember that Treasury Secretary who didn't even pay his taxes? Of course, he's one of those more equal than the rest of us. But what about those who really do pay more, who will still be so far ahead of everyone else? Peter now just has enough left over after he pays all his taxes for a mortgage, groceries, car payment, and the things his family needs to survive and send his wife to school. But I remember when he was working for Lehman, pulling down $150,000, how he used to complain that he had less than $100,000 left over after his deductions and stuff. So now Peter had to pay $150 out of hardly $150 out of hardly anything remaining, while his buddy John had to pay $150 out of probably close to $200,000 he had left over. Wow. Anyway, so while our tax system charges a higher rate for those who make more money, they still have a whole hell of a lot more left over to do with what they want. Now, I'm not saying it's not fair, that it's not fair. I'm just saying that that's what it is. Of course, there's a lot more to it than just the money left over. I mean, to be really fair, let's not lose track that those with less income are more likely to go to jail than rich folks, given the same crimes because of the influence of their economic condition. I mean, you just look to all those criminal cases where you got corporate America, where they just have to pay a fine, while those blue-collar types get jail time. So again, I guess we can say that poor folks need to learn not to commit a crime. But the point is, it's not just about having more disposable income left over to pay a red light fine. It's an attitude of government policies that also provides an imbalance depending upon what someone's income is. An imbalance of justice that's expanding, affecting more people in every part of our lives. And then the argument's made that the solution, the argument that some people make, is that the solution is to have rich folks pay more, so some sense of balance will be restored. That's the redistribution argument. Well, where do you think their money will go? Hello? It really doesn't ever get in the hands of the majority of folks out there barely making it. It goes to government. That's what redistribution is all about. Redirecting it from people who could spend it, stimulating the economy, to a government that'll just figure out a way to waste it while making expanding government look like it's going to help the folks, while its policies are what's causing the imbalance. We don't need to level the playing field by taking more away from people with more income. But maybe provide a more even playing field, for one thing, by not having income as the main factor in deciding costs or punishment imposed by the government. Like for example, with the red light camera deal, it could be, if you get a ticket, you have to participate in 1 hour of community service. And if you don't have the choice of paying for the ticket, you have to do the community service. Of course, somebody will complain that the time of folks in a higher income bracket is worth a lot more than the time of those getting paid minimum wage. Well, then the same argument applies. Those well off need to learn not to get a ticket. It just comes down to where we need to provide more balance to the system, rather than take away incentives to make more money, redirecting more money to government. The problem now is the cost of living goes up faster than the income of middle class folks, since it sees the government charges and spends what it thinks the wealthy can afford. And if the wealthy objects, gives them a loophole to use, causing a burden on the rest of us. That's where the imbalance of justice in our economic system is created. It's created by those in government who become willing participants in these ill-thought-out scams that give them more authority and power and end up dividing the community. So a company shows up resembling something out of the Music Man, selling a bill of goods to cities, that they'll be able to increase their revenues without spending any money on equipment or enforcement. Sounds like the perfect deal. And what mayor or council wouldn't jump at that chance? It's like a money tree to them. But it's like they went from representing the regular folks like us when they were running for office, remember? To representing the best interests of government now. Only problem is, in a case like red light cameras, the money comes from citizens without any benefit to the economy. It pits the government and the red light company against the folks. And not that they'd ever conspire to shorten that yellow caution light to get more revenue. You know how that works. So the money is either absorbed into government or paid out to the company leaving town, never to be spent on stuff that would normally multiply through the community. Remember how it multiplies when the price of gas goes down? The opposite happens when the red light camera people show up and money is taken out of the economy. What happens is there's less spending at the barber shop, so the barber spends less at the bakery, so the baker can't buy tires for his car, and the tire dealer can't even afford to take his family out to eat. And all of a sudden the government has less taxes coming in, so they have to raise taxes and take more money out of our pockets. Well, what we need is to just have trust in common sense and human nature, and understand the multiplier effect on the economy. And if we have it, we'll spend it, and if we don't, we can't. And then there are even some Tea Party folks falling into the trap of saying this increased revenue from these cameras are good for the community because it pays to expand government without increasing taxes. Like money going to government from the folks isn't a tax? But you know, if you're really a free market type, you could change things around a little bit to make it that when someone gets a ticket, they have to buy something. Now, that will take something that those in government may not like to do. Think of something new, thinking outside the box. A little strange, but outside the box. So let's say you get a $100 ticket for going through a red light. You got to spend it at a local small business. And then that local small business will spend it at another small business, etc., etc. Now, I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but taking money out of the community's economy is insane. And who knows, pretty soon there'll be so much tax revenue coming in that the city can afford to hire more police officers to give out more tickets. Just kidding on that one. We want less government. And of course, you have to be careful which businesses are involved too. I mean, there might be a spike in violations and tickets issued. if to women, especially, if a jewelry store was part of the deal. Or to men, if a store that sold tools was involved. But what I'm talking about here is how to create a new economy without the government taking money and purchasing power away from the folks buying the necessities of life. We're the one who drives the economy. It's just changing the responsibility of government from worrying about itself to allowing citizens to determine their own welfare. You know, it's because of all this, this government interference in our lives for its own good and its favoritism that's causing our economy to shrink. And those with less money to spend sink deeper and deeper since they can't improve their lives with investments or education and end up not being contributors to the economy they were in the past. And may eventually have to depend on government just to live. Many of those prosperous folks who play the game with the government, getting richer on paper without creating anything but their wealth, that doesn't help the economy either. Now, my buddy Peter knows both sides of that issue, and I'm sure he has a different point of view today than he had last year about each side. And if he had worked creating or building products, he'd probably argue that those industries provided a real contribution whether somebody got rich or not. What I'm saying is that creating wealth isn't what makes our country rich. And increasing the size of government really doesn't make it easier for people to live. Our only hope is to bring the cost of governing down so that folks can pay their bills and still have something left over to spend. And changing things that unjustly reward those who have more influence than the ability to produce goods and services that we all need. Because it's been getting worse. It's like there are fewer and fewer people who have something left over, anything left over. But what they have left over is more and more. Like I said, it all snuck up on us. And how do we let it happen? Maybe it was that we got so distracted with stuff that shouldn't matter that we didn't notice that it was starting to get hotter